This is the Vega Pod, where we will be discussing Christian and secular issues from a biblical perspective. All right. I appreciate you guys tuning in. We're going to be looking at an article I found. More or less, it's discussing reality versus narrative. The article is from the Gospel Coalition. It was written by Brett McCracken. The link to the article will be posted in the description. Let's go ahead and jump in. All right. Let me share my screen here. Let's see. All right. Let me pull this up on my end. Okay. Let's roll. Reality versus narrative. Breaking news, left narrative, right narrative. We're accustomed to being on one side or the other. Society as a whole functions as you're on one side of the extreme or the other. Polar opposites, right? We as Christians need to strive to be somewhere in the middle. At any given time, we'll lean one way or the other. And I think that's okay as long as we do our best to get back in the middle. Let's go ahead and jump in here. Let's see what he has to say. The biggest emerging fissure in Western culture is not necessarily between political left and right, as much as those fiercely committed to reality, even when it goes against the narrative, and those who elevate the narrative, whether left or right, above reality. As Christians, we want to make sure that we're on the side of reality, whether that supports our point or discredits our point. We want to be on the side of reality, and that's very important. The world is looking at the church, and the church has the ability right now to set a great example. Throughout history, unfortunately, the church hasn't had, what's the word here? Doesn't have the best track record. The church is usually on one side or the other, as opposed to being on Christ's side, right? We want to be there wherever Christ would be. That's where we want to be. Now, some of the issues that we're struggling with today, it's a little harder to do that. And we have to try to find that balance, right? And where it's not clear, be willing to extend towards each other grace, right? And not be so dogmatic on what we believe as opposed to what someone else believes. But when those issues are clear, we want to make sure that we're aligning ourselves with Scripture, with what God has to say. Let's jump into the next one here. This is what he has to say in the article. He quotes Emma Green. Even as scientific knowledge of COVID-19 has increased, some progressives have continued to embrace policies and behaviors that aren't supported by evidence, such as banning access to playgrounds, closing beaches, and refusing to reopen schools for in-person learning. Now, COVID-19 has been one of those things that we just weren't prepared for. That's just the truth. But I do think it's kind of funny and silly and hypocritical when everything started kicking off. Those on, I guess you would say, the left, were telling those on the right, hey, you got to go with the science. You got to believe what the science says. Now that the science has shown that, the likelihood of COVID-19 spreading when you're outside, or how there's like no solid evidence that COVID-19 is spreading in schools, yet these progressives want to continue to keep these lockdowns or restrictions in play. That shouldn't be the case. If we're going to follow the scientific knowledge on one side, we have to follow it on the other as well. We have to be consistent. Now, as I'm saying this honestly, yes, it applies to the world, but this is for us as Christians, right? We have political leanings, political left, political right, in the middle, whatever. Let's make sure that if we were sounding the horn for scientific knowledge in the middle or in the beginning of the pandemic, we're doing the same now. Let's not backtrack, right? Like, be consistent on your stance. No matter whether it agrees or disagrees with you, be consistent. This is the second point here. Where are the people who live in light of the facts about reality more than their feelings about it? Where are those whose understanding of the world is shaped more by evidence and logic than by narrative and anger? Where these people exist, they're the true radicals. So again, it's between narrative and reality, feelings and facts, evidence and logic. Evidence and logic go hand in hand. Narrative and anger go hand in hand. So if we're leaning on one side, we have to be consistent. Now, as Christians, we need to follow the facts. That's what is modeled for us throughout the scriptures. Yes, our feelings come into play. And I read a book recently that really helped me understand how our feelings and emotions are a huge part of our faith. And we're not going to say that that's not true, that that's not the case. But we have to make sure that our feelings are being backed up by the facts, that it's not just our feelings, right? We can't live off of our feelings only. Now, feelings are a part of life, but we have to make sure that it matches up with reality. That's the most important thing. We're going to look at a verse here from Proverbs 18:13. It is from the Amplified Classical Version. And it says, "He who answers before he hears the facts, it is folly and shame to him." Now, one thing that I've noticed is that we're real quick to jump on a narrative, but we don't know all the facts, right? We're real quick to say something, but we don't know all the facts. And that applies on both sides, the left, the right. And if you want to be in the middle, then hey, if you're in the middle, it applies to you too. But let's be for real here. When stories come out, don't just go off of what the first thing you heard. Wait a little bit. Maybe look at the other side. Maybe look at a couple different articles. Try to find the full story. Now, that's hard. Excuse me. But we have to do so. As Christians, we want to make sure that we're on the side of truth, on the side of reality. So don't go sharing articles or posts. Excuse me. Oh, man. All right, I'm back. We want to make sure that we're on the side of the facts. So if you hear or you see an article written by this site or this person, go look on the other side. Figure out where the truth is. And as we'll look through these slides, we'll see that that requires some work. It requires some effort. But for us as believers, that's what we need to do. All right. Exodus 18:26, ESV, it says, "And they judged the people at all times. Any hard case they brought to Moses, but any smaller matter they decided themselves." And this is talking about when Moses is, I think they're coming out of Egypt and on their way into the promised land. And this is with his father-in-law, Jethro. And Jethro notices that Moses is handling all these cases by himself. He's like, hey, you're going to get tired. You got to appoint some people to help you out here. So this is kind of leading into that, where the judges have been appointed and they help Moses decide these cases. Now, this is what stands out to me the most here. And they judged the people at all times. They always judged. They didn't stop. Any hard case they brought to Moses, but any small matter they decided themselves. Now, they waited to hear the cases, both sides, right? So somebody's saying this, someone else is saying something else. They met together, they discussed, they brought it before the judge or before Moses, and then a decision was made. They didn't just hear one side. They listened to both sides and then made a decision. As believers, we're to do the same. Look at both sides, then make a decision. And make your decision based on what the scripture has to say. Let the scriptures guide you. Let's jump into the next one here. He says, it's tragic that this is true even within the church, where Christian politics often shapes how they interpret and apply the Bible. In a world of competing and ultimately subjective narratives, we need more people radically committed to reality. Again, we have to be in alignment with the truth. We can't just let what the world is saying mold us and shape us. We're supposed to be molding and shaping the world. And I agree. He said it's tragic that it is true that this happens even within the church. It talks about how Christian politics shapes how we interpret and apply the Bible. That should never be the case. We should allow the word to interpret itself. We One of the rules or principles when interpreting or exegeting the scriptures is to interpret what's not so clear with what is very clear. So use what's very clear to shed light on maybe what's not so clear. Humans have always been tempted to prefer convenient narratives over inconvenient reality. It started with Eve's choice to believe the serpent's narrative after all. This is a good point. And he mentions Genesis 3, verses 1 through 7. Eve believed what the serpent said. Eve didn't go and talk to Adam. Eve didn't go and talk to God. Had she done so, she would have gotten the full story, the reality. But it's like he says, it's convenient. And we're going to go into a couple more of these as to why we prefer narratives. Let's go ahead. This is 3 points that he mentions. Here's number 1. We're too overwhelmed. Narratives are easier. Reality is often more complex than our narratives demand. The pursuit of reality is a necessarily laborious endeavor, and it requires patience. Now, there's a lot of gray areas, and that makes it a little harder to kind of get to the core, right? But that's okay. Like I said earlier, we use the scriptures to guide us, and in those areas where it's not so clear, extend grace to the other side. But here's the big point here. The pursuit of reality, it is a necessarily laborious endeavor. When you're trying to find truth, it's hard work. It requires research, spending time reading multiple articles, going to different sites that perhaps you disagree with what they're saying. It takes effort and patience. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. It might take you a couple of days, might take you a couple of weeks, might take you a couple of months. But we want to try to find the truth. Oh, man. Maybe I shouldn't have had that before I did the video. All right. We're going to go to point number 2. We're too impatient. Narratives are faster. Facts take time to gather, but narratives offer quick answers. Uncovering reality in all its complex glory is a slow burn. If a narrative is adopted en masse, it becomes reality for posterity, regardless of the facts. Now, this is kind of what I was saying earlier. It takes time. Facts take time to gather. As Christians, we should be very familiar with this. When we study the scriptures, when we're doing independent Bible study, it's effort, it's work. If you're doing independent Bible study, you know what I'm talking about. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't come together with other believers to study the Bible. No, you should do that. I would venture off to saying that that's a requirement as being a Christian. But independent Bible study is something that's required as well if you want to continue to grow in your faith. The two should go hand in hand. Independent Bible study with others. But it takes effort, right? And it says facts take time to gather. Now, this is something for me that is important. It speaks to me because when we look at the resurrection, Gary Habermas and Mike Licona, they have something that they've coined called the minimal facts argument. And this is in regards to the resurrection. That takes time and effort. Gary and Mike took time to put this together. Now, as someone that tried to study this to help me inside, try to bear witness, it took me time to gather those facts, to look them up, to a little more digging, to find out, okay, is what they're saying really true? Can I use this in a conversation? Or is it going to do more harm than good? It took time to learn what they were saying. It took time for me to go back and make sure that what they're saying was true. but it was worth it because it's reality. The resurrection is true. It's reality. So yeah, it says uncovering reality. It's a slow burn. It is. It took time. It took effort. But when you're done, it's very rewarding and helpful. And when we share things that are just advancing a narrative, we're hurting the truth. We want to make sure that what we're spreading, what we're sharing, is reality. It matches up with the facts. Otherwise, we're doing more harm than good. As the church and as believers, that's not an option for us. Point number 3, we're too self oriented. Narratives serve us. We're tempted to prize narratives over reality for another, more basic reason. We're self centered, sinful creatures. Nail on the head. We like narratives because we're sinners. That's the truth. We need to repent of that and align ourselves with the truth. Now I'll go back. I keep going back to the truth, and you'll see why at the end. But the truth is what we as Christians hold on to. And because we like how narratives make us feel, confirming our biases, patting us on the back for the supposed rightness of our views, narrative driven news sells. When we consume these false narratives, what we're telling the news media is that, hey, keep pumping this stuff out because we love it. We're going to continue to read it. We're going to continue to pay for it. We're going to continue to buy it. It helps nobody. Let's make sure that we're aligning ourselves with reality. And what we're sharing matches up with the truth, with the facts. Only a humble deference to truth outside the self can free us from the prideful prison of narrative skewed bubbles and self serving distortion. Now, I like that. Only a humble deference to truth outside the self. The truth does not reside in us. We as believers, we know that. But the world doesn't. So we have to lead them. We have to guide them. The church is to be blowing the, what do you call that? The loudspeaker, the horn or whatever. And show the world, hey, listen, the truth is outside of you. The truth is something that's objective. It is not based on your preferences. And we as Christians need to model that. All right. Here we go. The church is well positioned to be one of the clearest defenders of reality in a world of narratives. We have the foundation of truth, the scriptures, and the truth that liberates, Jesus. This is the one entirely true narrative. The narrative that doesn't just spin reality, but establishes criteria for evaluating it and a lens for illuminating it. Sadly, many Christians on all sides are now stressing narratives over reality or letting narratives determine their perception of reality. God made, God glorifying reality is so much more satisfying than self made, self serving narratives. Christians should be fighting for the former instead of falling for the latter. I mean, this couldn't be said any better. The church is well positioned. We have the truth, the scriptures, the truth made flesh, and Jesus Christ. We should be the loudest voice advocating for truth and reality, not championing narratives that support our political points of views. Let's make sure that we are aligned with the truth, which is Jesus Christ, and that we're aligned with reality. God made, God glorifying reality. That's what we should be aligning ourselves with. All right, last one. John 14:6. Jesus said to him, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. As Christians, we should align ourselves with the truth because Jesus Christ is the truth. And when we align ourselves with the truth, we align ourselves with Jesus. All right. I appreciate you guys tuning in. This is it for now. Keep an eye out. I got a couple other things in the works. And if you like the video, hit that like button, share, subscribe. If you're not following me on Instagram already, there's my handle. I have a couple of things coming up with a couple of friends, and either next week or later this week, I'll be doing another video breaking down a few verses of Psalm 119. I'll catch you guys next time. Have a great week, and I'll talk to you guys then.